Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're taking on a truly complex and layered saga. It crosses continents and really gets into the tension between these huge global institutions and deep national identities.
That's right.
We're unpacking the story of Jonas Biru. He's an economist, a former staffer at the World Bank, and his story. It just evolves from this decade-long internal legal fight into a really highly charged public political campaign centered on Ethiopia.
Exactly. And our mission here is to give you a shortcut through all this intricate material. We need to clearly separate two very distinct but, profoundly linked narratives that our sources detail.
Okay, so what are the two?
First, the long legal battles that Biru waged against the World Bank. And second, the dramatic ideological shift that happened afterward, which really informed his public critique of Ethiopian ethnic politics.
And we're sticking just to what the sources claim, right?
Mm-hmm.
The official decisions, the documents, and what the implications are.
That's the plan. We're just reporting on the material itself.
Okay, so before we dive into the legal fight, let's just set the scene a little. We're talking about the World Bank. This is a massive multilateral institution.
Huge. And incredibly diverse. It's staffed from over 170 countries. There's a really significant number of people from sub-Saharan Africa and the Caribbean.
And that's a critical piece of context to hold on to, especially when we start talking about his claims of racial bias.
It's absolutely crucial. The bank also has its own independent justice system. It's built around something called the Administrative Tribunal, which is designed to handle staff grievances fairly.
Okay, so that's the system he was operating in.
It is, and that's where this initial conflict it grew into something much bigger.
All right, let's get into that first chapter. The long battle with the World Bank, which the sources say ran from around 2008 to 2015. And this wasn't just one dispute.
No, not at all. It was a professional grievance that escalated into what the sources call a decade-long personal battle. It resulted in 5 separate cases being filed before that tribunal.
5. That's a lot of persistence.
The persistence is the first thing that really jumps out at you. So we have to start with the foundational one, case number 402, back in 2008. Biru alleged that the bank failed to appoint him to a position because of racial discrimination and retaliation.
So, a really serious claim to bring before this independent body. In an institution that you just described as hugely diverse.
Yeah.
How did the tribunal rule?
Their ruling was, to put it mildly, unequivocal. The tribunal stated very plainly that they found no evidence of discrimination or retaliation.
None at all.
0. And they went further. They pointed to a very specific detail that, just completely contradicted his claim of racial bias.
Which was?
The person they actually selected for the job was also African.
Oh, well, that immediately undercuts the whole premise of the racial discrimination claim, doesn't it?
It does, but the tribunal didn't even stop there. They added this very strong admonition in their judgment.
Okay.
They noted that some of Biru's own actions, which were documented during the investigation, were, and I'm quoting, arguably per se grounds for dismissal.
Wow. So the judges are essentially saying, not only are your claims unsubstantiated, but your own conduct was a serious problem.
Exactly. It's a powerful initial defeat. But he comes back just a year later, in 2009, with another case, number 437.
And this time, the claim is wrongful termination.
Right. And this is where the legal nuance gets really, really interesting, because on this one, he actually got a partial victory.
A partial victory. Okay, tell me about that. What's the distinction here?
This is such a critical point. The tribunal did side with him, but only on procedural grounds. They agreed that the process the bank used for his performance-based termination was flawed.
So not the reason for the termination, but how they did it. A technicality.
A technicality, precisely. And because the bank didn't follow its own internal procedures correctly, he was awarded a pretty significant amount of money, 3-year salary, plus another $10,000 for legal costs.
3-year salary is a huge win. So if he won the case, why wasn't he reinstated? If the termination was wrongful enough for that kind of payout, why not give him his job back?
And that is the absolute core of this ruling. You've hit on it. While they gave him the money for the procedural mistake, the tribunal flatly refused his request for reinstatement.
Right.
They made it crystal clear. They stated that Biru had shown contempt for the institution and that his return was simply not appropriate. So it was this strange outcome, a financial victory, but also a profound character-based rejection.
That detail is so crucial to the whole story. He gets a massive payout, but the highest court in that system basically says he's unfit to return.
And the sources note that this one partial win, the one about the faulty process, was the only tribunal outcome he ever accepted.
So for him, it wasn't over.
Not even close. He just kept trying to reopen the judgments. We see 3 more cases after that. One in 2013, one in 2014, and a 5th in 2015.
All trying to do what?
All trying to reverse the earlier findings. And every single one of them was dismissed.
So at this point, the legal options are exhausted. And that's when things shift from an internal grievance to a full-scale public pressure campaign.
To the court of public opinion, basically. He starts expanding his reach, contacting U.S. politicians, congressional leaders, civil rights groups, journalists, all while demanding another $1.2 million from the bank.
The intensity just keeps ramping up.
It does. And it reaches this truly dramatic and very concerning peak in 2013. This incident is just vital for understanding where his perspective was at this point.
Okay, what happened? What was this dramatic turn?
In July of 2013, he sent an email directly to the president of the World Bank. And in it, he laid out a plan for a very public, self-injurious protest.
Wait, what did he say?
His words, as quoted in the sources, were, "I intend to cut my finger on October 11 in front of the bank during the annual meetings. My finger will be delivered to your office the same day by a carrier in a jar."
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That is shocking. That is so far beyond a typical employment dispute. It sounds like a complete breakdown.
Absolutely. The World Bank, faced with this very specific threat of self-harm, they immediately notified public safety officials, law enforcement. It just shows you the level of escalation he managed to create.
So throughout all of this whole years-long battle, what was the bank's consistent position?
Their stance never wavered. They were firm, consistent. They considered the matter settled by their independent judicial process. They upheld every ruling.
And they kept pointing back to their diversity record.
Repeatedly. They emphasized that a diverse panel of judges, including African judges, had reviewed and dismissed his core allegations of discrimination on multiple occasions. Their argument was that the one ruling on a procedural fault didn't in any way validate his bigger story of institutional bias.
It's fascinating. He's trying to get a decision from 2006 reversed almost 2 decades later. That deep personal sense of unresolved injustice, that refusal to accept legal closure, that feels like the pivot point for the next part of our story.
That is the key connection. That energy of needing to rewrite history, of needing this external validation that the world was against him, it seems to have transferred directly from the World Bank to the political arena in Ethiopia. The personal became political.
And that brings us to Section 2. The transition from professional grievance to, political crusade. The source describes Jonas Biru as an economist who, despite claiming mixed Amhara-Oromo descent, had spent years building an image of himself as a kind of technocratic neutral.
Right, as the expert who could rise above Ethiopia's complex ethnic dynamics and lead. And his moment of truth, he thought, came with the massive political change in Ethiopia in 2018.
So after that transition, he traveled to Addis Ababa.
He did, with very high, very specific expectations.
And what were those expectations, according to the sources?
He was apparently anticipating an appointment to a very high federal office, specifically governor of the National Bank or, a major ministerial portfolio in the new government led by Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed.
So the technocrat comes home, ready to be put in charge. But it didn't happen. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed didn't select him for any of those positions.
And this right here is the transformation moment. The source states that when that political door closed on him, his entire tone changed almost overnight.
Almost overnight.
His political disappointment morphed into what the source calls a resentful crusade. And the target immediately shifted from the World Bank to Oromo identity, Oromo scholars, and the Oromo cultural renaissance itself.
And the sources frame this not as some kind of neutral analysis, but explicitly as a pattern of ideological retaliation. What framework does the source use to break that down?
Source materials are very structured here. It claims his campaign against Oromo identity is rooted in this old Ethiopianist logic, which is designed to delegitimize the Oromo political existence.
Let's define that term for a second. Ethiopianist logic. What does that mean in this context?
In the framework the source uses, it's this historical tradition, often tied to a central imperial rule, that tries to homogenize the national identity. It often does that by subordinating or even erasing the distinct cultures and languages of non-Amhara groups.
The idea that there's one true way to be Ethiopian.
Exactly. And the source argues this campaign follows a very calculated 4-part sequence, Label, define, dehumanize, and destroy.
Okay, let's walk through that. Step 1, label, manufacturing the threat.
So here, Biru is claimed to have crafted this new narrative. He takes the term Oroomma, which is this deep cultural and philosophical identity for the Oromo people, and he rebrands it as an existential threat to the state. He starts throwing labels at it like extremism, supremacism, and fabrication.
So the source argues this criminalizes an entire identity. It turns a cultural affirmation into a political weapon.
Precisely. By sticking these labels on it, he creates a political shorthand for danger. And that sets the stage for step 2, define, or what the source calls usurping identity.
Taking control of what the word even means.
Yes. Instead of acknowledging that there's huge diversity within Oromo thought, the source says Biru just unilaterally defines Oromuma himself. He frames it as a negative conspiracy built by scholars he dislikes. He basically reduces it to a caricature.
The source calls this epistemic domination. That's a very academic term. What does it mean for you, the listener?
It just means controlling knowledge. It's the idea that I, the external expert, get to tell you what your own identity is and whether it's legitimate. The source says this mirrors a historical tool used by elites to control the national story.
And that takes us to step 3, dehumanize. The source calls this the emotional core of the whole campaign. How is this done?
The source alleges that Biru systematically collects reports of atrocities, violent incidents in the region, and then uses them not to call for justice for the victims, but to generalize the guilt. It's a strategy to paint Oromuma itself as a collective pathology.
So he deliberately blurs the lines between civilians, militants, political actors.
Exactly, and this blurring is seen as incredibly destructive. The source makes a really chilling connection here. It compares this technique to patterns seen in places like Rwanda and Bosnia, where one group's suffering is weaponized to justify hating an entire population.
So by stripping millions of their humanity, by painting their identity as a virus, the source argues he's preparing the moral groundwork for erasure.
Which leads directly to the final step in their analysis: destroy, aiming for total cultural nullification.
This is where he targets the culture itself.
The most foundational parts of it. The details involve directly attacking Oromo symbols, festivals, traditional systems. He allegedly targets Iricha, which is a huge annual Oromo Thanksgiving festival, and the Gada system, a traditional democratic structure.
And his argument is that these aren't legitimate cultural expressions.
Correct. The source says he claims these things are fabricated, divisive, inherently dangerous. The ultimate goal, as presented in the source, is to purge Oromo identity from Ethiopian politics entirely, unless, it's sanitized to fit a narrow, centralized ideal that he personally defines and endorses.
Which the source says directly parallels century-old imperial policies.
An exact parallel, according to the source.
So if we stand back and look at these two narratives together, the story of Jonas Biru, according to our source material, is one of a grievance that transforms into an obsession. First, there's this rejection of legal closure at the World Bank after a professional disappointment, and then a resentful crusade against an entire national identity after political hopes were denied.
The personal weight in all this is just immense. The frustration of being denied high office, right, after years of legal battles where you got a huge payout, but were also told you showed contempt for the institution. It seems to have just fully translated into an ideological mission.
And the source's main argument is powerful.
It is. That this hostility toward the Oromo didn't come from objective scholarship. It came from profound political disappointment.
And the sources provide a clear counter-narrative to that. They don't let that critique stand unchallenged.
No, they don't. The source strongly asserts that the Oromo people are actively reclaiming their own history and dignity. And they conclude with this critical statement that Oromo identity is not his, meaning Biru's, to define, nor is it his to silence.
It's an incredible analysis of ambition turned into ideological fire. It really forces you to think about the weight of personal ambition and disappointment when it gets projected onto, first, a global institution, and then onto a volatile national identity. What stands out to you, the listener, about that moment of private conflict with an employer, with a political system, becomes a public ideological mission targeting millions? Think about that transformation the next time you hear a political firebrand claim to have neutral, technocratic expertise.